Hello everyone, welcome back to another Q&A, this time episode 1 for the Skaven. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Our first question comes from He-M, who asks, how is it even possible that the Empire denies the existence of the Skaven? The dwarves are an important ally to the Empire. Do they know that the Empire denies the existence of the Skaven, and have they ever tried to do something about it? So, the short answer is, the Empire does know about the Skaven. The higher-ups, the people in control of the Empire know the Skaven exist. It's the masses that don't. And the Empire and the Skaven kind of have both of a mutual interest in keeping it that way. The Skaven like to keep everyone in the dark because in their opinion, it's better for no one to believe they exist because it makes it easier for them to operate. It makes it easier for them to get things done. And people are less likely to retaliate against them. The Empire, on the other hand, the ruling class, wants to keep people in the dark about the Skaven because, in their opinion, if all of the common folk were to learn that there were millions, if not billions, of a horribly intelligent, evil race right beneath their feet at all times with enough numbers and power to rise up and swallow their empire whole, well, there was some concern there would be mass panic and rioting, and that it might force the Skaven to act, which is not an entirely inaccurate opinion. Plus, the Skaven actually go through extreme means to destroy evidence of their existence. So Clan Eshin, which is the clan that's all about assassinations and stealth work, and they have a very Eastern theme to them, and lots of like ninjas and people who use or cover themselves in all black, they go out frequently to find evidence of their existence and just wipe it out. So they go out and find like text about them or, you know, specimens, and they steal it or destroy it or burn it to make sure that there's no evidence that they were ever real. On top of this, the Skaven also have a bit of a grand ritual that they work very hard to maintain, and the point of this ritual is to make them a little bit more of a shadowy entity and to suggest to people that they're not real, to make it easier for the idea of Skaven to slip from people's minds. That being said, the Empire kind of has this weird obsession with the idea that the Skaven aren't real, because many empires do acknowledge they're real, like Tilia for instance, without going completely raving mad. But that's just how the Empire upper class feels it's the best way to handle the situation, especially after the Black Plague incident where the Skaven came up under the Empire and nearly conquered it. As for the dwarves part, the dwarves acknowledge that the Empire don't believe in the Skaven, like they recognize that, and any dwarf who's in a room with you will tell you without blinking that Skaven exists, and if you try and tell him they don't, the dwarf will usually end up just ignoring you, or he'll probably end up breaking your nose, if you're lucky. Maybe he'll kill you if you insult him. So, on the wide whole, there are many people in the Empire who just don't meet dwarves. They don't meet anyone who would know about the Skaven, because much of the Empire is, you know, secluded away in massive forests and all these other things. So, it just kind of comes down to the fact that there are a lot of invested parties in making sure people don't know about the Skaven, to the point where like witch hunters will execute you if you overtly try to investigate their existence. And there are careers dedicated in the Empire to make sure the Skaven maintain a low threat to the Empire. There's a whole career of these individuals known as rat catchers, and despite the fact that many people think their job revolves around just catching small rats, they are very infamous among the Skaven as people who are taught a skill set to deal with the big kinds of rats. But they're typically they're not intelligent individuals. They're typically pretty low members of society, but they have the smarts to know not to speak about what they find down in the depths and just kill what they can and try and keep the Empire safe. So at the end of the day, it just comes down to the idea, as I was saying earlier, that there are a lot of parties who think it would be best for the Empire as a whole not to know that the Skaven exist. And there are very few parties who do know that the Skaven exist who have an interest in making sure that the Empire knows. They just don't consider it worth the effort or fighting the upper class of the Empire for. So that's where this idea comes from, where you know, one of the most powerful nations of men on Earth doesn't believe the Ratmen exist. It's just a whole clusterfuck of events and things going on that makes it like that. So, hope that answers your question. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Alright, next is from Jerec12, who asks, how competent are the Skaven melee infantry on a unit basis? Obviously, they would lose very easily in a 1v1, but would they be able to trade against the same cost unit of human or dwarves, or is the infantry really just there to hold the enemy down for monsters and war machines? So, it depends on the Skaven unit. Most Skaven infantry are absolute garbage, in that they don't do lots of damage and they take lots of damage. What makes Skaven infantry special is that it is just a tar pit, is typically what we call them in tabletop. Meaning that Skaven bring enough numbers, and when there's more of them, their leadership tends to get higher, and they can become this unbreakable swarm of just nonsense. And it's not that they're particularly dangerous, it's just that there's so many of them, it takes forever to chew through them. And the longer you're stuck in combat with them, as you asked in your question, you're getting pounded in the flanks by monsters and war machines and all sorts of other nasty things. There are some Skaven infantry units who are particularly nasty. For instance, the Stormvermin tend to trade extremely well. They're not quite as good as most elite infantry, but because there's so many of them, they can usually go toe-to-toe with most high tier infantry, but they will decimate any like average tier or below, because not only are they typically a little bit better, but there's tons of them. They won't, you know, be able to go up against dwarf ironbreakers and win, but they will be able to go up against dwarf ironbreakers and hold them for a while and do enough damage that if they maybe had support from a clan rat unit or two to like surround the dwarves, then they could probably break them and win the day. Skaven are not about winning a one-on-one encounter, even with units. If you're playing Skaven and you try and just meet your enemy's front line, you're going to lose, because that's not how Skaven are supposed to work. The way Skaven are supposed to work is you send in the cannon fodder, you know, all the slaves and the clan rats, to wrap everybody up in combat, and then you send all of your goodies around the side while your war machines blast everybody from behind. Skaven war machines, of course, being the most devastating in the Warhammer Fantasy universe next to the Chaos Dwarves. And their monsters and other war machines like the Doom Wheel are very maneuverable, very swift, and although not exactly reliable, they can do tons of damage. On top of that, the Skaven like magic lores are extremely powerful in that they have two kinds of focus. Typically, Skaven magic either buffs the Skaven at a cost, like usually they kill their own guys to make them more powerful, or they just do tons of damage and don't really give a shit who gets hit. It just depends. But like I was saying, what you would do with Skaven elite infantry like Stormvermin is that when your shit infantry engages, you wait until they get all murdered and they do some damage to the enemy and wear them out, then you send in the good stuff. And hopefully CA gets it right by making the Skaven units very large and having them have really sturdy leadership if there's lots of them. That way, like maybe, you know, how if right now units can get like a bonus if there's like a friendly unit to their flank, Skaven hopefully have that in spades. So you can send in those slaves and everything to wear out your enemy, and then when everything breaks and runs away, then you send in the heavily armored Stormvermin with halberds, and of course the your reserves of clan rats, and you follow up with your really big scary monsters. But the slaves are the crux of any good Skaven army, both in the lore and in tabletop, in that you just send in all the tar pits to tie your enemy down, and you just start wailing on them as hard as you can. You send clan rats around the flanks to get a good surround, you send hell pit abominations and doom wheels around the flanks to get into people's rears, start tearing up units, and of course to take the flanks for you. You have light infantry that follows along who shoots the crap out of people, like warp fire throwers, rattling guns, poison wind globadiers, and of course you have your war machines like the warp lightning cannons and the plague claw catapults, just absolutely nuking people from a distance. Skaven are all about making a really big U shape around their enemy and bombarding the hell out of it with shooting, flooding it with low cost melee infantry, and then once the enemy has been completely softened up, then you send in the Stormvermin and you mop up. So, can Skaven trade effectively 1v1 even on a unit basis? No, they can't. but that's not what they're good for. You know, that's not something that their army has ever been designed to do well. You know, they're very low leadership, fairly terrible, I guess what would equate to melee attack, not great toughness either, except for maybe on their characters. Some of their units can trade well, like Clan Pestilence tends to trade very well, cost efficiently, because they bring a lot of extra goodies into the field, like poisons and plagues, diseases, and they have a lot of frenzied individuals who can just tear people up. But of course, if they run into anything with even a moderate amount of armor, they tend to just absolutely get washed. So no, Skaven is all about a complementary fighting force. But they're an army that really works well with that because they're much faster than most people and there's just tons of them. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's go ahead and keep moving. Our next question comes from Squats Forever. That is a very unfortunate name. Since the Horned Rat, even before the end times, was a chaos god, why doesn't he have more demons? Also, why is it monotheistic? How come there aren't other rat gods? Technically a two-parter, but that's fine. So, the reason the Horned Rat doesn't have more demons is because he's not that powerful of a god. You have to remember that for each of the chaos gods, their demons are like a fragment of themselves, splintered off and basically made into an individual who goes forth and does things. The Horned Rat is the weakest of the Chaos Pantheon, except for maybe Hashut might be slightly weaker than him. But the Horned Rat does actually have demons. A lot of people like to forget about them, but there are these guys called the Vermin Lords. And the Vermin Lords are essentially greater demons, and they're very terrifying, powerful individuals who are very sneaky and are much more interesting than your typical greater demons. They're much more inventive on how they present themselves. And the end times, one of the things that I think they did really well was that it provided more versions of the Vermin Lords, where it seemed that the Horned Rat, instead of investing all of his power into just creating lots and lots of types of underlings, he focused his efforts on taking like the 4 major facets of Skaven ideology, Skaven emotions, and forging them into types of really powerful demons who are capable of actually directing the Skaven and like getting things done, which I really liked a lot. And you can look them up quite easily online. Of course, the Warbringer, who represents more of the Warlord clans, the Corruptor, who represents the Clan Pestilence side of things. Oh gosh, the other two are going to be hard to remember, but there's one that kind of represents more of the Clan Scryer, like the inventive side of the Skaven, and more of like their magic and technology and how they mix together. And the last one, who I can't quite remember what it's called, is based on the sneakiness and the backstabbery of the Skaven. He's very Clan Eshin themed. And I thought that was a really cool way to represent how the Horned Rat represents his power and influence in the world. But as far as to why he doesn't have like legions and why he doesn't have lesser demons, major demons, and least demons, that pretty much just comes down to the fact that he just doesn't have enough power, and that's not how he likes to influence the world. The Horned Rat is very much he's a scion of ruin, and he tends to have this really focused ideology on really big over-the-top acts, which is very much like the Skaven themselves. So I think it doesn't really fit the way he views himself and the way he wants to interact with the world and conquer it, for him to have loads of demons, especially when the Skaven are his children, which are already such a massive, sprawling horde. There's not really anything that lesser demons could contribute to that, but greater demons, like big, terrifying, monolithic monstrosities who can lead his legions into battle and go up against the greatest champions, those are what the Skaven really need. So it's good that he invests in that, because it really fills out their roster and helps them focus around a central figure. As to why is it monotheistic, the Horned Rat is actually not a monotheistic religion. There are 2 aspects to the Horned Rat, which are the Grey Seers, who have much more of the typical, they're like the old school religion based around the Horned Rat, and they focus much more on the ruin, quote-unquote, aspect of how he's presented. And Clan Scryer has kind of like a cult split off of that. Like they have a very similar ideology to the Grey Seers, but they like to mix it with all their technology and sort of warp it to their own ends. And the Grey Seers often kind of look at them as heretics a little bit, and those two hate each other. And then there's, of course, Clan Pestilence, who came in much, much later, and they developed their own sect or cult of the Horned Rat religion while they were in Lustria, and had like disease and plague-addled visions of their god, who blessed them with immunity to all these horrible plagues and filth and all this stuff, and it made them stronger instead of killing them. And that created a complete subcult, which is the second most powerful cult next to, of course, the Grey Seers, and they really represent the horned rat in his aspect of plague. So you have these two completely different religions that focus around the same god, but instead of there being multiple horned rats, there's only one horned rat. But there's a big argument among many of the Skaven about which is his true iteration and which of his aspects is, of course, the one that's most deserving of worship and all these other things. So although there aren't multiple horned rats, he's not a monotheistic religion. It's actually a religion. It's kind of like how in Christianity you have like Protestants and Catholics and stuff like that. The Skaven have very much that sort of ideology going on, where they technically only have one god, but they all interpret him fairly differently, and there's big almost all of the Skaven civil wars have featured very heavily around the idea of someone presenting a new idea of what they believe the horned rat should be interpreted as or worshipped like, and Clan Pestilence, of course, being the cause of both of the largest civil wars ever, because Clan Pestilence is just a huge pain in the ass and are very, very powerful. So, is it a monotheistic religion? Technically. But hopefully that answers your question about why there's not other rat gods, and just having one is enough contention for the cowardly and backstabby Skaven as it is. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's keep rolling on. Next is from a Humpier Rogue, who says, if a female Skaven is born albino or with horns, would they be chosen for something greater than breeding, or would they just be considered an even better breeding machine? Unfortunately, for those of you who are hoping for a Joan of Arc or a Réponse de Léonas from Bretonnia, no. There is no female Skaven heroes, and there never will be. They are purely idiotic breeding machines who are stuffed with pipes and all sorts of horrible, horrible things to make just, you know, the ultimate breeding pit for Skaven. So, in answer to your question, if there were an albino one or one with horns, you know, signifying the favor of the horned rat, they would, of course, immediately be sold off to one of the probably most powerful clans as a very high-quality breeder, because if she was capable, of course, of producing albino spawn or Grey Seers, you know, with horns, the Skaven would be all over that. She would be worth so many Warpstone tokens, it's not even funny. But there is no hope whatsoever for a female Skaven to be anything but a breeder. That's just not how Skaven culture works, and their females at birth are just immediately set into this ideology. And that's all Skaven will ever value them for, even upon the end of the world and going into the Age of Sigmar. It's the same thing. So a very hardcore part of Skaven identity and Skaven culture is that the females are solely breeders and are used to make thousands and thousands and thousands of pups. So unfortunately, you're not going to see a Joan of Arc of the Skaven. That's just not how they roll. So if you want to look for females denying gender roles and becoming heroes, I'd look more over at the Bretonnia side of things. The Skaven is definitely not where you want to be. Next question. GrievousKhan asks, have there ever been any female Skaven heroes for the Under Empire? The answer, of course, is no. There's not happened any in the past, either. I answered a two-parter earlier, so I guess I'll let this count as a question. Blame the randomizer if you want to blame someone. Don't blame me. Moving on. The Great Book of Grudges asks, do Thaggoraki tunnels reach far enough to the island of Ulthuan? And the answer is technically yes, but also no. So Skaven have managed to dig tunnels all the way across the Great Seas. So they're able to get from, of course, the New World to the Old World and beyond without any issues. However, Ulthuan is a special case because when the Old Ones created Ulthuan, they literally lifted a continent-sized rock out of the ocean floor and made it float. So there's this, it's literally a floating island. It's, you know, it's like Atlantis. So there's no actual under earth connecting to Ulthuan. There's just ocean beneath it. So the Skaven cannot physically dig to it, and they've tried and failed miserably every time. Yeah, they're not physically capable of getting to Ulthuan except for by ship, which has never gone terribly well for them. So next question. Gabriel Perrella asks, do the Skaven have any sort of standard, as in an evil act that even they would consider abhorrent and disgusting? For example, for the Beastmen, hurting or killing a Bray-Shaman is considered a heresy and crime of the worst kind. No. The Skaven really are not above doing anything to advance their own way in life. they do kind of have like a couple ideas. The only reason a Skaven won't do something is because he's scared it's going to result in him being killed, not because he's actually disgusted by the act. So for instance, there's Skaven who are would consider it heresy to like make fun, or not make fun of, but like call in disdain upon the Horned Rat's name because they feel betrayed or something. But that's not because they're super loyal to the Horned Rat per se, more of the situation of that he's very smite happy and has no problem like doing absolutely terrible things to Skaven, and they're terrified of him. So they, you know, so there are some individuals among the Skaven who have lines they won't cross, but as a race, no, they have a very nasty tendency of always upping the ante against each other. And like there are plenty of things, like if you read the Grace Here Thankful series, which is marvelous if you want to kind of get into the mindset of Skaven, it's a fantastic series. But there are plenty of times that the Skaven just keep reaching new low after new low after new low, and they just do absolutely hilariously, it's so absurdly evil that you can't help but find it funny, just the depths they're willing to go to put themselves ahead. So no, Skaven don't really have a good system of morals. The only time that they really follow the rules is because there's something bigger and scarier than them that is basically enforcing them, not because they actually have a moral standard that they won't abandon at the drop of a hat to either keep their own skin alive or to further their own personal cause. The Skaven are the absolute lowest of the bin when it comes to that sort of thing, because even Chaos has morals in the sense that they have rules their gods sort of give to them that they follow in their mind. Slaanesh not as much, but the other three definitely. And the Skaven are just no. They are just absolute bottom of the barrel, and they will eat each other and do all sorts of terrible things, and they don't give the slightest of damns about anybody but themselves. So I guess the only thing a Skaven would consider heresy or abhorrent and disgusting is actual self-sacrifice, because it's so unusual among their kind. Though supposedly there are some of them, there are individuals of course who are exceptions, but as a racial whole, no, the Skaven don't really have any redeeming qualities in the loyalty or moral departments. So hopefully that answers your question, and let's move on. Richard Round asks, I have a question on the Horned Rat. For the other gods, they gain their power through the actions and worship of the mortal races, with the four major gods gaining additional power through the laws of the universe, like change and stagnation, etc. My question is then, how did the Horned Rat come to be? In the Skaven creation story, a stranger built a tower on the bell, etc. that caused the creation of the rats turning into Skaven. So he made his own worshippers, but then where did he come from? So is the Horned Rat a mage that ascended to godhood when he was worshipped by his man-rat creations? Or because of crossover between Nurgle and the Horned Rat, is the Horned Rat a demon prince of Nurgle that has become powerful enough to become his own god? Wow, that was a mouthful. Okay, so here's the thing. Nobody is 100% sure exactly what the Horned Rat is, but I do have my own personal theory that I think is the most likely option. When you're looking at the story, I think it's called the Doom of Khazvar. If that's, I know it starts with a K. I think that's what it's called. Which is now Skaven Blight, which was a city that the Skaven originated from. There is indeed a strange individual who arrives and completes their tower in exchange for a promise, and I'll talk about the story more in depth another time. But who is the figure is ultimately the big question, because whoever that mysterious figure that came in and finished off the tower that would become, of course, the tower at the center of, you know, the great temple of the Horned Rat, a lot of people wonder who he was, because the icon that he put upon the top of the tower is, of course, the ultimate version of a screaming bell. It's the first of their kind. It's a true icon to the Horned Rat. And my honest belief is that this individual is Tzeentch. And the reason is that Tzeentch is a god who takes immense pleasure in taking a situation and basically reversing it in every possible way and leaving whatever he just flipped over on its head behind. And he loves doing that. And what essentially happened in that particular city is that was a city, that was like the capital, ultimate dedicated city to Myrmidia, the goddess of justice and combat and, you know, honorable warfare and all those things. And she turned her back on those people because they became so obsessed with their own pride and so just drowned in their own hubris that when they originally decided to build a tower to honor Myrmidia, they became too much with it, and it basically is it's a Warhammer retelling of the Tower of Babel, which, if you don't know, is when mankind tried to essentially build a tower to heaven to basically stand at the same level of God, or something along those lines, or invade heaven or whatever. And in this story, it was of course very similar. The humans wanted to build a great tower to show, originally to show Meridia how like humble they were, but it turned into something darker, and it instead became this obsession of showing how amazing they were, and they wanted to stand on even level with the gods. So you have this human city of these people who think they're the highest caliber of human, and they've essentially built this tower to honor the goddess of justice and honor, honor and all these things. And this mysterious stranger shows up and finishes the tower for them, because they became physically incapable of actually climbing the tower to complete it, because it had been generations and they were desperate to finish it, even though they could have just stopped. And so he asks, I will finish it for you if you allow me to put my own icon on top, and they say fine. So he does, and the icon, of course, he puts on is the bell, which begins to toll, and over the course of 13 days, the city falls to the not the ancestors, but like the very first forms of the Skaven, which are, large rats that stand on two legs. And there was even a dwarf hold beneath them. So you have this super powerful city that represents honor, justice, combat in the most, in the most glorious sense, and dedicated to the goddess of strategy and all these other wonderful things. And he even has a dwarf hold beneath it, representing the alliance between men and dwarves, and it's just this ultimate icon of just honor. And this stranger shows up out of nowhere, and with this dedication turns the situation completely on its head, and instead makes it this festering pit that's the birthplace of a race that's all about cowardice, backstabbing, treachery, and is kind of the ultimate enemy of the dwarves, and in many ways mankind, is that they are the biggest enemy to that alliance, in that the Skaven are such a disgusting mockery of everything it means to be a man or a dwarf. The Skaven in their entirety are just a mockery of all of those things. And so, in my opinion, it has always been Tzeentch who set that trap, who sort of kicked over the first domino in his own amusement. But the moment the Skaven were created, their own emotions, their own desires, and all the things that create the gods flooded the system. And in that moment, especially with so many of them and how erratic their emotions are and how powerful they are, they created the Horned Rat, who then came into his own and actually became a legitimate chaos god. So I don't think he's a god in disguise. I think he was created by the actions of Tzeentch, who of course doesn't mind him too much, and that probably explains why in many ways he is a reflection of Tzeentch, in that he has a lot of similarities with backstabbery and all that stuff. But of course he does seem very much like his own god, because of course later he also came to represent many aspects of Nurgle when Clan Pestilence called for him to aid because they were suffering for disease, and he took everything about lizardman culture and everything that Clan Pestilence was doing, and he twisted it to serve the Skaven and made them immune to disease and made them welcome it and made it a part of them. And Tzeentch and Nurgle, if you don't know, are opposites. They hate each other, and they represent complete opposites in almost all ways. In that Tzeentch is constant change, Nurgle is complete stagnation. Tzeentch is all about, life transition to death. Nurgle is kind of more about resisting death and life eternal. And they're different. They absolutely hate each other because they're opposite opposed. And the Horned Rat, yet, is a mixture of the two of them, which is very strange and very interesting at the same time. So I honestly think that I think the mysterious stranger who created him was Tzeentch playing in his usual game and doing something he thought was funny, that led to the creation of this god, who then, because of the nature of the Skaven being rodents and rats, which of course naturally inclined them to disease and things that kind of lie in Nurgle's domain, created this weird combination of both Tzeentch and Nurgle, who's this disgusting amalgamation of decay and ruin and pestilence, and is just a really sinister and evil being. And I think that's kind of how we got stuck with the Horned Rat. So is he his own god? Yes. Was he specifically created? No. I think he was created kind of by accident. Because Tzeentch, if you ever read a lot about Tzeentch, Tzeentch tends to just do things that he thinks are funny, and then he just sort of walks away and just lets everything spiral out of control. He might have intended to make him, but Tzeentch might have intended to do everything or nothing, because Tzeentch is always that kind of, you know, just as planned figure, even if something completely goes totally awry. So, if anything, Tzeentch is his father, but Nurgle also may have had a slight influence on what he became. But I do think the Horned Rat is his own entity. I do not think he was a greater demon that was elevated. Like, I do think that's what Hashut is, to an extent. But that's a question for another time. But hopefully that answers your question, and let's keep moving so this video doesn't get too long. Alright, LittleNomojo asks, do most Skaven at birth start as clan rats or slave rats and kill their way to a higher position, or is there a ranking system to determine who becomes a Stormvermin, Skaven Warlord, or Ratling Gunners, and so on? Okay, so Skaven, most of their positions are determined by birth. So when a litter of pups is born, if they are particularly powerful looking, and they have, like, usually they'll start eating each other, and, like, you know, attacking one another, and the litter will usually show a small hierarchy among itself. So the biggest, meanest pups of a litter are typically taken, and they will become Stormvermin, especially if they end up having black fur. Black and white fur are the most valued fur colors among the Skaven. Black furs tend to become Stormvermin, white furs tend to become the most elite type of Stormvermin, or they tend to become something special, but they're usually marked as great by the Horned Rat. Gray Seers at birth are very noticeable because they'll have horns, which is very unique to them. So if a Skaven has horns, they're almost immediately captured and taken to go train to become Gray Seers. As for the rest of them, the Skaven do have a sense of progression, so long as you start off in the right position. Pretty much a clan rat or above can become something major. So, like, and it also depends what clan you're born to. So if you're born to a warlord clan, your progression of hierarchy is going to be much smaller than most other clans, because you can become, you know, most of the time you're going to spend your entire life as a clan rat. Maybe if you get really lucky and you prove yourself clever or intelligent, but not too intelligent so you're not a threat, you might be elevated to the position of a chieftain. Stormvermin typically are going to become your warlords, because to be a warlord you have to be kind of the biggest and the strongest, as well as pretty damn smart. So that being said, Skaven is definitely a dog-eat-dog world where everyone's constantly backstabbing, constantly betraying, constantly trying to kill each other. So it's all about who you know and what you're able to accomplish without getting caught, and how to make allies at the right times and kill said allies at even better times. So that being said, slaves, no, you're totally fucked. If you're a Skaven slave, that's all you'll ever be. You are, at best case scenario, you will die very quickly from starvation. Worst case scenario, you end up being experimented on or fed to, like, giant rats that take a while to eat you, or used as, you know, cannon fodder in the front lines. And the Skaven slaves, they're absolutely doomed. They don't have a good life. The only reason there's so many of them is because Skaven breed so fast, and probably like 50-60% of all Skaven become slaves, like, really quickly. And of course, whenever a clan is absorbed by another clan or taken over, almost everyone in it becomes a slave. Outside of that, if you're in one of the four greater clans, you have a little bit more room for advancement, so to speak. Clan Pestilence, of course, you become a Plague Monk, and Clan Pestilence is basically all about, you're basically just stuck in this foetid squalor, and you keep building up diseases and fanaticism, and the more diseases you can intake without dying, typically the higher up you move on the totem pole. But you have a really high level, or risk of catching a pretty nasty virulent disease, or, you know, being an assistant to a plague priest who concoct something really bad, and he uses slaves, or maybe you, if you're unlucky, as a testing subject, and you'll just die horribly. But Clan Pestilence is very much about who can take the most disease, who's the most fanatical, and other than that, it's very similar, and they move up those ranks. The true fanatics, the ones who don't care about advancement and just embrace, you know, the Horned Rat, want to be something just completely batshit crazy, those are the ones who will become like the Plague Censer Bearers, who wield weapons that are literally poisoning them and killing them on the battlefield. The ones who are a little bit more intact, brain-wise, and are a little less suicidal and actually care about themselves, they're the ones that you're going to see trying to get onto like the Plague Claw catapults and the all of the other little tinkery things, and try and move up to like Plague Priest, and then of course to the Arc Plague Priest, and try and get up to work alongside Nurgle. Or I think I forget what yeah, there's a name for the top level Plague Priest, but I can't remember it off the top of my head right now. As for Pontifex, they're Pontifexes, that's what they're called. Anyway, the other clans are very similar. Clan Eshin, of course, is all about training and just surviving it. They have a lot of operations done to them, so like their fur is dyed black, and they're covered in black, you know, robes, and they go through extremely intense training. Their scent glands, which all Skaven have, are surgically removed in a special type of ritual, and they're taught to be very, very... they're much tighter together than most clans are, though they do backstab each other still anyway. And the way you gain ranks in them is just by accomplishing missions and working your way up the roster, of starting as like a, typically like a gutter runner, and then you move up to, if you're lucky, I forget what the career above that is, and then you'll move, of course, to assassin, and so on and so forth. And maybe if you get lucky, you'll end up as one of the death masters, like Snigich, and if you make it above him, you have a chance, of course, at taking on the Death Lord himself, Lord Sneak, which nobody, of course, has ever managed to pull off. Clan Scryer, they have the most quote-unquote opportunity for advancement, because they have lots and lots of different war machines, and all of the war machine crews are operated typically by Clan Scryer. So your Warp Fire Throwers are operated by essentially Clan Rats of Clan Scryer. So are your Doom Flayers, and your Plague, and your Poison Wind Mortars, and your Warp Lightning Cannons. Typically they'll have an engineer among them who is a little bit, or an assistant engineer at the very least, who are a little bit more clever and have managed to worm their way into an assistant position, but it's a really high casualty rate or high turnover rate, but with, you know, your life ending being tending how you tend to evacuate that position. And the most clever among them, who don't make themselves too much of a threat, can of course become warlock engineers, which are the experimenters and the engineers and all that stuff, who invent all the really crazy toys, and they tend to augment their bodies with machine parts and stuff like that. Clan Molder, which is the last clan we'll really focus on, that clan is a very dangerous clan, because they like to experiment on each other. They like to try and make monsters and other Skaven and other creatures of various races into their most elite war scene forms. You know, the rat ogres being a blend of ogres and rats at first, but then they sort of figured out a way to just sort of create these horrible amalgamations of rat and ogre, or Skaven and ogre, who they could just pumped like tons of stimulants into, and like, you know, watered down warpstone, and they like graft things onto them, so they tear off their arms and put a mechanical arm or just a big mace or a cannon or some other BS to make them more dangerous. So in Clan Molder, your job starts off as maybe Clan Rat. If you're particularly lucky and prove yourself useful, you might survive to be, you know, help to be a pack master who like leads the giant rats or cracks the whip at the rat ogres, and pray they don't turn on you and go in the right direction. And then of course you might end up becoming, if you survive that, you might become a master molder, who are the real flesh crafters and the guys who are able to control their own beasts and maybe will ride on top of a great pox rat or other BS. And of course work your way up those ranks. So hopefully that answers the question. I think that was maybe more intensive of an answer than you were looking for, but you know, more information can't hurt. So the answer is yes and no. How you're born does have a very big deal, in that, you know, the typical three classes are like, if you're a black fur, you're a Stormvermin. If you're a white fur, you're a leader of some sort. Or if you have horns, you're a Grayseer. So that's kind of like the leader category. Then you have the black fur, which is the Stormvermin category. And then everybody else is a fucking, you know, is a slave if they're particularly sickly or whatever, or a clan rat. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's go on to the final question for today's video. Today's final question comes from Relano1, who asks, have the Skaven ever tried to mess with the Vortex or invade Ulthuan, and if they did, would they stand any chance of success? So, yes, the Skaven have tried to invade Ulthuan multiple times, in fact. The most recent being about 100 years, a little more than 100 years before the modern timeline. Or if you're looking at the timeline of Total War Warhammer, literally quite almost on the dot of 100 years before then. It has not gone well for them. So because they don't have tunnels able to get to Ulthuan due to the whole floating island crap I talked about earlier, the Skaven have to go by boat, which presents a couple of issues. First, Ulthuan is shrouded in a magical enchanted fog, which unfortunately for anybody trying to invade Ulthuan makes it so that either if you're antagonistic towards Ulthuan, they tend to have a habit of you'll go into the fog and get lost and end up slamming into a rock and, you know, everybody dies. Or the fog will sort of redirect you and you'll just sort of pop up somewhere else randomly, either going back east towards the old world or going south towards the Southlands, and you just completely miss Ulthuan. Assuming you're able to get to Ulthuan, which the Skaven have managed to make a moderate success rate of doing so, you then have the problem, of course, of the High Elf Navy, which is the most powerful in the world, and if the High Elf Navy finds you, you're dead. The Skaven especially are dead, because the Skaven do not have very powerful fleets. They are very ramshackle, put together absolute messes, with some technological marvels that can of course reap a tally against the High Elves, but don't really stand a chance at a prolonged engagement, and if a High Elf fleet finds you, you know, like, there's probably a dragon involved and other problems, and the Skaven ships are literally packed to the brim, and it would be bad. Of course, that time that the Skaven made it about 100 years ago, it doesn't take much for the Skaven to get established somewhere. Like, if a good amount of Skaven got onto an island and managed to hide somewhere, they could probably start sending communications to Skaven Blight and would manage to coordinate getting a breeder there somehow, and then the Skaven would just be a permanent infestation. However, when the Skaven invade Ulthuan, the elves have been ready and waiting for them every single time and have killed every single one. The most recent time, the Skaven actually managed to land with a very significant army, but unfortunately for them, Caradryan was paying attention because he was on the he was near the Shrine of Assuran with all the, you know, the Flame Phoenixes and the Frost Phoenixes, and when the High Elves were like looking pretty nasty and not doing so well, I think there was a Hell Pit Abomination involved in that. All the Phoenixes joined in the fray, and the Skaven just got completely wrecked. Skaven are actually fairly terrified of elves. They really don't like them because they're quicker than they are, you know, being the Skaven. And the Skaven do not like dealing with a race who are naturally gifted at dealing with them, because the elves, of course, have very good hearing, very good eyesight, are magically inclined, and are very, very swift. And they're kind of better at all of those subjects than the Skaven. The Skaven are, of course, better at sneaking around and have much more devastating weaponry when it works. But much like goblins, the Skaven don't care for the elves very much. That being said, the Skaven, no, they have never successfully invaded Ulthuan, and they never will. Even when the world was ending in the end times, the Skaven still couldn't be bothered to get to Ulthuan because it was just too difficult for them. And after that invasion about 100 years ago, there was actually a pretty strong declaration sent out by Skaven Blight that essentially said, please stop trying, because you're just wasting resources. That being said, I'm looking forward to Total War Warhammer, where if you're playing as the Skaven, once they're of course confirmed to be in the game, it better be Skaven, then of course you'll be able to invade Ulthuan and do it successfully. Or maybe, who knows, maybe watch the High Elf AI be actually intelligent at dealing with you. So anyway, hope that answers your question, and that is the last one for today. Alright, and that answers all the questions today for the Skaven Q&A. So I think for next week, to keep our Game 2 theme going, let's go ahead and do Dark Elves. So whatever questions you have relating to Warhammer Fantasy Dark Elves, post them down in the comment section below, and I will randomly select 10 of them, and we will proceed as normal on next Saturday. Sorry today's video came out so late. I just got back from a vacation in a different part of Texas, and I've been trying to get all my stuff back to where it's supposed to be and get all caught up on everything, so I've been lagging behind a little bit. So Hopefully you all are doing very, very well. I've got tons of new stuff coming, a couple of announcements, some things I think y'all are going to be really, really excited about, especially for those of you who maybe want to interact more with the community and myself. I've got something special coming for you guys I think you're going to fall in love with. So I hope you're all doing really well. I love you all very much. I hope you're safe. All that jazz. I will see you again very soon. I gotta go. Talk to you later. Bye.